I want to tell you a little bit first about the Orphan Train history. In 1850, New York City was a city of only 550,000. And that was during the time when there was a lot of immigration, a lot of people moving to New York City because of the Industrial Revolution. They were moving there to work in factories, and New York City became a very crowded city. A young congregationalist minister named Charles Loring Brace came from Connecticut and moved to New York City to continue his theological studies. He walked down through the ghetto and saw all these homeless children living on the streets, sleeping in doorways, sleeping in the gutters, and he estimated that there were maybe 10,000 children living on the streets of New York City, down in the ghetto. The newspaper interviewed him, and they said, no, it was not 10,000. It was more like 30,000, which was like maybe 5% of the population of is this working? Okay. I thought for a minute it didn't work. If you can imagine that in Jefferson City, there'd be like 20,000 children or something. No, not 20,000, 2,000 children or something like that. So Charles Loring Brace decided that he wanted to do something for these children. And he went to some other prominent people in New York City, and they decided to start an organization called the Children's Aid Society. The Children's Aid Society wanted to find education for these children, homes for these children, and an industry for these children. Back then, children were expected to work. That was before any child labor laws. They set up houses of industry. They set up newspaper boy homes, schools where these children could go to school, and they had such a large turnout of children that were being brought in that they finally decided, that was in 1853, they started the Children's Aid Society. In 1857, they had so many children that they decided to start putting them on trains and sending them west. They started with one train that went to, and I never know whether I'm pronouncing this right, Dowagiac, Wisconsin. And the children accidentally got put on a cattle car, but that was the last time that ever happened. Over the years, the Children's Aid Society, and later the New York Foundling Hospital, after it was founded, sent over 250,000 children west on trains. And yet this was not put in the history books. In 1869, I think it was, the Sisters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul were asked by the Catholic Charities in New York City to, just a moment. To found a home, a hospital actually, they called it first, to save the babies. There were so many little infants that were being found in gutters, on doorsteps, in barrels, in the river. There was a lot of infanticide going on. There was even abortion going on back in those days in very well, we don't want to talk about that. But, so they, the Mother Superior of the Sisters of Charity asked a young sister named Sister Irene Fitzgibbon. That's my mom. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's my mom, shortly after she came to Missouri. It's Sister Irene Fitzgibbon. She was a young sister, and they asked her and another sister to found an orphanage for children. Sister Irene had been very sick a few years before that, and she was in a coma. And while she was in that coma, she dreamt that she was in a room with lots of children. She never knew what that meant until they asked her to found this orphanage, and then she decided that's what she was meant to do. Sister Irene and the other sister, Sister Teresa, that was her assistant, they went around first. First they went to other orphanages, find out how they did things, and then they went out begging, and they were donated a building to start their orphanage. The first night, they did not plan on taking any children for a month, or 3 months, I think. And they thought they didn't have any baby beds, they didn't have any kitchen equipment or anything. And they decided that they would try to do that, and in 3 months they would feel like they could be open. That night they had a baby on their doorstep. Within the end of the month they had 43. So that shows the great need they had for that type of a thing. By the way, Children's Aid Society and New York Foundling are still in operation today. Their focus is a little bit different. It's more on adoptions and education and things like that now. This was later the New York Foundling Hospital. It was first called New York Foundling Asylum, and the children were all called inmates. But that was a common thing for any hospital or anything. They called everybody inmates. This New York Foundling Asylum had a hospital wing, had a children's wing, and they were wise enough that they isolated a child. When it first came in, they would isolate it for 2 weeks, and that, therefore, they had a lot fewer contagious diseases that happened there. One of the magazines said they were praising New York Foundling for their low mortality rate compared to the other orphanages. It was only 45%. This is a picture of little children saying their night prayers at New York Foundling. Of course, my mother is not on any of these pictures. These are pictures we got out of books and such. That's one of the Sisters of Charity with a little child in the high chair. The New York Foundling, after they had been in existence from about 7 or 8 years, they also had so many children, they couldn't handle it. And so they decided they would start doing orphan trains also. Newspapers called them baby trains because New York Foundling focused mainly on children, babies up to 3 years. So, but they did not like the idea of children being brought into train stations and put up on a stage for people to make their choices. That's the way the Children's Aid Society did. The train would go into a station, and they would people would come, and they had these flyers sent out first, and they would tell people that they could come and choose a child, and that's the way they did. The child was not required to go with the new parents, but many of them did anyway, because they were intimidated. This flyer here was one that went to Troy, Missouri. There's my mama again. My mother was born in 1898. And her mother brought her to the New York Foundling when she was not quite 3 months old. For many, many years, we had no idea why she was brought there. But in later research, we were able to find out the reason why she was brought. But we'll get into that later. So, in 1901, Mama, little Irma Craig, was brought on a train to Osage City, Missouri. She was, when that train came through St. Louis, there were about 45 children on it. When they got to Jefferson City, there were at least 36, because my mother had a number on her, a round number tag on her, and she was number 36. So we knew she was 30, there were at least that many. And when they came into the train station, there was a crowd there waiting to see them. And one of the people there was Katie Boehm. Mom would have said Boehm, something like that, in a German accent, B-O-E-H-M. And Katie had number 36 pinned on her. And so when Mom got off the train, remember she wasn't quite 3 years old, but she must have recognized that number that she had been wearing for a couple of days. And she said, "There's my mama." And Katie told that story to many, many people after that her little Irma recognized her as her mama. The way the Foundling did it they didn't want the children to have to stand on a stage and be chosen. So they contacted, through their agents, they contacted pastors of local Catholic parishes. They dealt with Catholic children. They would take any child, any ethnicity, any race, any color or creed, but the day after they came, they were baptized Catholic. Which my mother was too. She was not baptized when she came there. In 1901, she came to Missouri, and she had her parents were already assigned to her. That was George and Katie Boehm. The parents could actually, when they applied for these children with the pastor, they could actually say what kind of a child they wanted. They could say, "I want a blonde, blue-eyed child. I want a red-headed child. I want a dark-complected child with dark hair and dark eyes. And the sisters would try to fill that. It was kind of funny because in researching the different Orphan Train riders that came to this area, they were many times, one of them that came down to Osage City, for instance, was told that she was Irish, and don't you forget it. They told her that. Well, when we found out what her real name was, it was Cohan. She was a little Jewish child. But the sisters, they tried to fill the applications as much as they could. And I know another good friend of my mother's was Marion Burke. She came with the name Marion Beck. Marion Beck, and when we researched her, her name was Marion Burke. She was a little Irish girl, and they changed it to a German name. So she and my mother were good friends. We think that this is a picture of her first parents, George and Katie Bain. We're not sure of this. Some friends found this picture. They were neighbors of the Bains, and they found this picture among their pictures and gave it to us. And the Katie resembles other people, her brothers and sisters. So that's why we're just hoping that's who it is. The Bains lived in a little house. It was a little 50-acre farm near Schubert's, if you all know where Schubert's is, which is down where is it St. John's Lutheran Church is at the intersection of the highway that goes to Taos.
50 and
What?
50 and Highway M.
50 and Highway M, thank you. And their house was not far from that. It was later torn down when they did the on-ramps and off-ramps. So that's where she went. George and Katie had two young sons. One was Henry. They called him Heine, was his nickname. And he was 10, and the other one was Henry. Was Willie, and he was 15. The parents were very good to Mom. Katie was very strict, but she was never rough or mean with Mom. Mom was very fond of her. George petted and pampered her. She was his little darling. And in fact, later in life, he ended up coming to live with us when he was in his late 80s. And they said he was, I heard my older brothers talking about how he just doted on Mom. He just thought the world and all of her. This is a picture that actually, if you all know who Gary Kramer is, that wrote a lot of articles for the newspaper. He was president of the State Historical Society. And he had this in the newspaper and with an article about Schubert's. And when I opened up the newspaper that morning, I showed it to my husband, Don, and I said, look at this. And I didn't say what I thought about it, and he said, is that your mom? It looks just like her. That was my mom, and we think probably around 6, maybe. I don't know who the other people in the photograph are. When she was 6, she started going to St. Francis Xavier School in Taos, and that's where she went until she was about 12 or something like that. This is another picture of Mom in the churchyard at St. Francis Xavier Church, and she was 12 about. When Mom was 10, Mama Katie got pneumonia. The two boys had gone out to work on other farms, like lots of young men did at that time, and they became bad alcoholics. Eventually they came back home, and one of them got pneumonia, and Mama Katie got it from him. It must have been viral pneumonia. And Mama Katie died. Well, by this time, the two teenage boys, they weren't teenagers anymore, they were not nice to Mom. It was a bad situation, and they were bad alcoholics. And Papa George decided that she needed to go somewhere else where there was a woman to raise her. And there were 3 families in the neighborhood that wanted to take her. Isn't that something? That 3 people would be willing to take a little 12-year-old child, or 10, she was 10 then, and raise her. But they let Mom pick out. One was a DeBryan family, and one was this Rockers Nagy that took her, and I can't remember who the other one is. But they all were willing to take Mom. And they let Mom choose, and she chose the Rockers Nagy. We called it Rockers, they call it Rackers now, but we pronounced it the German way. And the Rockers Nagys, it was John Rockers. He was like a 45-year-old bachelor, and his sister was a couple of years older than him. And she had been married. Her name was Adeline Nagy, G-N-A-G-I. And she and her husband had separated many years before. Sad little side story to that is she left him when he started sleeping with his mother. But that's another little side story. So Adeline and Richard had a little 1-year-old baby named Mary, and they took her, Adeline packed her up with a bag of stuff and walked across the field and went back home to her brother and lived with John Rockers and her brother. And Mary, as she grew up, she was 18 when they took Irma, and she was always very, very good and partial to Mom. And she would give her, Mom said, ribbons from her old hats that she had so carefully pressed, ironed, and she brought them over to a shoebox of ribbons over to Mom. And back then, the little girls wore a big bow in their hair, so those ribbons were precious to them. And she bought her candy at a picnic one time. And so when they asked Irma who she wanted to go live with, she wanted to go live with Mary. And so that's what she did. And the day after she moved in with him, Mary went down to Schubert's, to the dry goods store, and bought some red calico and blue calico fabric for Adeline to make her some dresses. And that's what she has on here, I think. It's one of those dresses, because she said Mrs. Bain was very frugal, and she only had 1 or 2 dresses, and she said it seemed like they were always brown. So anyway, she had a very happy life. I can't see what this is.
Report to Foundling. It's the report to the Foundling home.
Oh, okay. Yeah, a report to the Foundling home. both the Children's Aid Society and the New York Foundling had agents or caseworkers, we would call them now, I guess, that would go and check on the children, either every 6 months or every year, and they would send in a report to the Foundling of the Children's Aid. And so we have record of the reports that they checked on Mom. When my oldest sister, who became a nun, when she was in New York City, getting her master's in theology, I think it was, she went to the Foundling, and they let her look at the records, and she saw them, the records of how often they checked on Mom, and they reported what they had said. The pastor did the checking sometimes, and sometimes the caseworker would come. And so we know that they checked on them all the time. And one time, the caseworker said that Mary or Adeline, whoever talked to the caseworker, said that they thought that she wanted to become a nun at some time. Well, Mom said she could never remember wanting to become a nun. But when she was, one of the last reports from the caseworker said the family wants her to stay at home. And that's kind of funny because Mom ended up getting married and having 8 children. This is my mother when she was in the 8th grade. When she, after she lived with the Rackers and Nagy's for a couple of years, she had made her First Holy Communion and her Holy Confirmation at the Catholic school, so they sent her to the public school, which was close. It was called it was on we always called it the Forest Hill Road. I can't remember the actual name of it. Maybe, but anyway, it doesn't make any difference. These little public schools have real nice names like Morro Bend School, or, anyway. So she went there, and she finished up her 8 years there. She was valedictorian of her class of 13. But that teacher there, she said, was such a good teacher. His name was G.A. Schultz, and she said he taught 80 children in a one-room classroom. That must have been a very crowded room. After she was out of school for a couple of years, where she stayed at home and helped at home, then she and another student decided they wanted to become teachers. So they talked to the county superintendent of schools, and he told them to go back to school, to the 8th grade, for a refresher course, and then they would have to go to teachers college. So that's what they did. They went back to school, and this G.A. Schultz, with that many children, gave them algebra lessons and literature lessons that they didn't get in the 8th grades. So he was really a dedicated teacher. Mom always praised G.A. Schultz. This is her graduation picture. That's Mom when she was about 16. So that would be maybe about the time that she was going to go to well, no, she was 18, I think, when she went to Warrensburg. Back then it was called Warrensburg Normal School. That was what a teacher's college was called. Later on, Warrensburg was called Warrensburg Teachers College. but back in her day, they were called Warrensburg Normal School. And she went there for 6 weeks with her friend that wanted to become a teacher. And while she was there, they both got the mumps. And so, they were down in bed for a while. But she was only there for 6 weeks. When she came back home, she took the teacher's exam, and then she was a school teacher. So she had 9 years of elementary school, you might call it, and 6 weeks, and then she was a school teacher. This is Mom when she was a little older. Wasn't she beautiful? I bet she knocked my dad off his feet. The first school that she taught at was Morrill Bend School, and it was, some people called it Sneeder's School because it was right on the edge of the Sneeder's farm. It was right on the Morrill River. If you're going down Bald Hill Road, it was there. And it was there for years until some vandals burned it down in later years. So she taught there for 2 years. On the neighboring farm, like I said, was the Sneeder's farm. And the Sneeders had, their oldest son had just come home from World War I. And he took a shine to her. And their first date, they walked across the field and across Morrill River, which was frozen solid. And she said it was long before they were going steady. My dad was a good-looking guy, too. This is a picture of Mom and Dad on their wedding day. They got married in 1922. She was 24 and he was 26. He had a farm down in Cold Junction Bottom. Some of his brothers and sisters also had farms down there. And so that's where they moved. They started out in a little makeshift house that Grandpa had built on his farm, hoping it would sell the farm easier. And they moved in there, and she said it was up on nail kegs filled with concrete, and they would put brush under it, trying to make it protect it, make it warmer. She said you could actually see daylight through some of the boards, and she said it was so cold, eggs froze solid in the shell. So they lived there until spring, and then they built a better house on the farm that my dad had. This is a picture of Mom later in life. She was probably in her 40s, maybe late 40s. And my brother, Edgar, some of his kids are here. And there's Sister Evelyn, my oldest sister. And there's Helen Cook. She's got some of her kids here too. Mom's raised us kids down on that farm until the Missouri River started flooding. It had not flooded for like 40 years until they moved there. And Dad died in 1939. My dad died when he was 42 of a heart problem that they were not aware he had. And so I was the youngest. I was 14 months old. And my oldest brother, Edgar, was 14. She raised us kids down there on that farm. We moved in and out from the floods. It started flooding almost every year. And you can imagine the house finally deteriorated. And so we moved up on Boonville Road to a big old house up there. And that's where I grew up. This is a picture of Mom and us kids. That's me sitting down on the ground. I guess they made me sit on the ground. No, they were always nice, but most of the time. So Mom stayed at home and took care of us until I was in the 7th grade. And I imagine that just out of necessity, she had to go to work. And she rented a typewriter, and she bought herself a typing instruction book and taught herself to type. Her plan was to become one of the employees of the state merit system, and which she ended up doing. She ended up never using her typing in her job, but that became a lifetime hobby of hers. She would just, if she saw an article she liked, she'd just sit down and type it. And we've got some, and luckily for us, she also started typing her memoirs. So that's where we know a lot about her history, is through her memoirs. There we are a little bit later. That's me on this end here. I'm not on the ground there. And that's Mom in the middle. She was probably in her 70s, I imagine. She worked at Employment Security, is where she worked. And she worked there for a number of years until her retirement age. And she really enjoyed those years. She became kind of a liberated woman. She joined a card club, and she joined the extension club, and she did quilting with some friends at church, and she really enjoyed those later years. There she is again. I have several artists in my family, and some daughters and nieces and nephews, and this is painted by one of my nieces, Barb Lindsay. That's my brother Stanley's daughter, and she painted that off of the baby picture, of course. That is Mom's birth certificate. It says she was born in June 26, 1898. Her father, it says, is Walter Craig. Her mother was Lida Steinberg Craig. They were both born in the United States. They were not immigrants. She was from Ohio. It just says he was from the U.S. It says there were 2 other live births, only one still living when she was born. We found out later that she had a sister named Ruby. This we found through some research of my niece and my son-in-law, is Mom's half-brother. I think his name was Earl. And that's Mom up there. And we just think there's a marked resemblance of the two, the eyes and everything. later in life, we found out these family people that did all this research. Walter was married 3 times without benefit of divorce the first 2 times. He was from Massachusetts, and he just moved around. He moved to New York, and he married her. Lyda Steinberg is her name. She was of Jewish descent. You can tell by her name, Lyda. And this was from his last marriage, I think. He passed away, I think in the year 2000, I believe. Unfortunately, we were not able to meet anybody that we could talk to. They were all gone. I can't see what that is.
The statue, as you said, in Kansas. It's the statue in Korea.
Yeah, just a few years ago, the National Orphan Train complex in Concordia, Kansas, started putting up these statues, and they would name them after someone. And this was a statue of my mother. The one that donated the statue was a teacher, and so she chose Mom because Mom had been a teacher. And the little girl is reading a book or teaching him to read or something. And now that is not a statue of my mother. It's just named in her honor. We went out for the dedication of that, the unveiling of it, which was very nice. A number of family members were there. And this is my mom in later life. She was a great smiler. She was a woman of deep faith, loved her family. She said in her memoirs that, she said, I started out with no family, and now I've got lots of family. And nothing we like better is to get together. I have to tell you, she had 8 children, 52 grandchildren. I'm not talking about great-grandchildren. These are 52 grandchildren. 2 of her siblings, 2 of the children had 9, 2 had 8, 2 had 7, and I had 4. Get them all together. This is the way most of the grandchildren would remember her.